a sharp new turn in Donald Trump's tariff roller coaster ride today. Donald Trump telling the world and the American consumers, brace for a brand new round of tariffs. At the end of his foreign trip, Trump announced that the administration will start sending out letters to trading partners to let them know of new tariff rates. Watch.
We have, at the same time, 150 countries that want to make a deal, but you're not able to see that many countries. So at a certain point over the next 2 to 3 weeks, I think Scott and Howard will be sending letters out, essentially telling people, it would be very fair, but we'll be telling people what they'll be paying to do business in the United States. So essentially be paying to be doing business in the United States. I guess you could say they could appeal it, but for the most part, I think we're going to be very fair. But it's not possible to meet the number of people that want to see us.
Check your mailbox. We're sending you a letter. What? What happened to all the deals that the administration was going to make? What happened when Donald Trump climbed down from his so-called reciprocal tariff rates? Trump officials then tried to save face when that almost collapsed the global economy by claiming that Mr. Art of the deal himself, the best deal maker ever, and the Trump administration was going to ink hundreds and hundreds of deals. Here's Peter Navarro saying that last month.
So we're going to run 90 deals in 90 days is possible. The boss is going to be the chief negotiator. Nothing's done without him looking very carefully at it. He has such a fine attention to detail.
Such a fine attention to detail that there are no deals. There's no deals. There's a framework for one deal with the UK. By the way, the UK accounts for 3% of our trade with the world. There's a framework for negotiations for a possible deal with China, not 90 deals in 90 days, like not even close, not even by Trumpian math. So today's announcement by Trump actually raises more questions than it answers. They're sending letters? It's unclear what countries are going to get their letters and whether these new tariff rates in the letters are going to replace the reciprocal tariff rates that were put in place by Donald Trump in the Rose Garden on Liberation Day, but then subsequently frozen after Liberation Day. Again, because the global economy started to crater. In other words, businesses and consumers don't know what to expect now. But they do know because of that announcement on camera that there are letters coming, and so we're all bracing for more confusion and more uncertainty on top of the chaos and confusion that has already put consumers in this country in a sour and anxious mood. CNBC reports this, quote, U.S. consumers are becoming increasingly worried that tariffs will lead to higher inflation. That's according to a University of Michigan survey released Friday, quote, tariffs were spontaneously mentioned by nearly 3/4 of consumers, up from almost 60% in April. Uncertainty over trade policy continues to dominate consumers' thinking about the economy. That's according to the survey director. That should come as no surprise because consumers are already paying more for the same things, all because of Donald Trump. CNBC adding this reporting, quote, even with the pauses on import levies against China and other countries, the effective tariff rate for goods entering the U.S. is still significantly higher today than it was before Donald Trump's inauguration in January. Donald Trump continuing to confuse and threaten the American consumers and businesses with more economic mayhem and pain is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Professor of Economics and Public Policy at the University of Michigan, Justin Wolfers is back. An MSNBC columnist, author of the newsletter To the Contrary, Charlie Sykes is here. Justin, just tell me, and I have to say, I am happy that another segment of the world, another segment of American civic society has to watch the things he says because it threatens to drop the bottom out of their existence. And that is, you know, the markets and small and large businesses and the American consumers. It doesn't mean I'm happy about the pain and the suffering that he's causing, but I am glad that there are more people to help me understand what he's saying. What do you understand this announcement about a new round of letters to mean?
Right. So the good news for you personally, Nicole, just for you, is you can start showing reruns. Don't have to turn up to work tomorrow because we've done this once before. Let me remind everyone how we got here. April 2nd was Liberation Day. Trump and his blokes got in a room and wrote down some numbers. They came out and said, here's our numbers. They were utterly incoherent. The penguins on the herd in McDonald Islands were very upset about it, but they weren't the only ones. So was Wall Street. And stocks fell by 12% over the next week as we were looking at a near certain recession in the eye. So time passes, 7 days, stocks crater, businesses call the White House. They say, what the heck are you doing? This is crazy. So Trump comes out and says, just kidding. I'm putting a 90-day pause because in reality, I didn't want tariffs. I wanted bargaining power so I could make deals. I'm going to make 90 in 90 days. In fact, we've had updates. We've had blokes on TV come on out and say, oh, we've made 8 deals, we've made 12 deals, we've made 16 deals, we're going to make 90 in 90 days. And then it turns out they've made 2. Let me read the last line of the UK deal. This document does not constitute a legally binding agreement. The China deal was let's talk again. So the deals aren't going well. So he says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get in a room and make up some numbers. Same as last time. There's one important difference, Nicole, and it's fabulously important. He's going to send a letter this time as well.
No deals. There are no deals. I mean, it is Charlie Sykes like Mexico paying for the wall. I mean, Mexico never paid for the wall. There was very little wall ever built. There are no deals. There are, as Justin just said, there are no deals. I mean, that is a factually accurate statement. What there is economic uncertainty for businesses large and small and higher prices for consumers, which is a regressive tax that disproportionately impacts working class and low-income Americans.
Yes, well, I'm sure, Donald Trump, who is a well-known Bible salesman, will recognize the aphorism from Proverbs that as a dog returns to his vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. Donald Trump keeps coming back to the same answer, to the same question that he failed on the test the last time. And so we're right back where we started from again. And here's just an indication that Donald Trump simply does not have a full grasp of how this is playing out globally. And the impact on consumers. So you're absolutely right. I mean, there's 2 key points. Number one, I mean, we're back to the uncertainty. The economy has been frozen in many ways. Consumers are getting increasingly nervous. And they're about to discover how deeply regressive these tariffs are, because the tariffs tax goods. They don't tax services. They tax the things that working class people pay for, not the kinds of things that many of Donald Trump's buddies pay for. And so we're going to be seeing the downstream effects of this very, very, very soon. And I think that there was probably some wishful thinking on the part of the business community in the markets that after he blinked on the China deal, that Donald Trump had learned his lesson. Well, this is the one fixed idea that Donald Trump has had in his head for 20 or 30 years, and he's going to keep coming back to it again and again and again. And despite all the wishful thinking of the markets, here we are. We're going to be replaying this again.
Let me read again. I'd like to sort of stay focused on what this means for American consumers who make up traditionally the health and the resilience of our economy. This is new reporting in Bloomberg. Quote, Trump to keep 30% China tariffs in place until late in 25. Quote, U.S. levies on Chinese products imposed this year will likely hold at 30% through late 2025, according to a Bloomberg survey that had 22 respondents from a mix of Asian, European, and U.S. fund managers, banks, and research firms. While much lower than before the thaw this week, the current rate is high enough to wipe out 70% of Chinese shipments to the world's largest economy in the medium term. That's a projection from Bloomberg Economics. I also have this reporting that I think, Justin, I'm going to need your help explaining from CNBC, that the stacking of tariffs pushes the true cost for retail goods much higher than 30%. Prices that we pay on the sticker or on the tag of a sweater isn't just going to be the price before while Joe Biden was president, plus 30%, the Trump tariff tax. It could go up by 46%. A cotton sweater, that's 16% most favored nation, plus the fentanyl and reciprocal tariffs. Women's bathing suits from China face a tariff of 54.9%, 24.9% most favored nation, plus the fentanyl and reciprocal tariffs. A baby's dress that's made in China faces a tariff of 41.5%, 11.5% most favored nation, plus the fentanyl and reciprocal tariffs. There have been tariff announcement after tariff announcement after tariff announcement. Trump again today on camera talking about a letter that will be on top of the other tariffs he's already announced. Just talk about how that layers into the price tag on an item at Walmart or another retailer.
Right. So all of those numbers you read were just very confusing. So let me deconfuse them. I want you to remember all the way back in time to the start of January of this year. Back then, we did have tariffs on China. There were tariffs that the first Trump administration had put on. There were tariffs that the Biden administration had continued or put on, and there's even tariffs from earlier. Those tariffs on average are probably about 8%, but they're higher for some things, like it sounded like girls' dresses, and they're lower for other things. So those tariffs are there. Then Trump comes along and says, I know how to prevent fentanyl getting into the US. I'll put a 20% tariff on China. That is a tax on Americans importing goods from China. So now all of those numbers go up by 20. And then he added his Liberation Day tariff of another 10. Well, he actually added a lot more and then brought it all back down. Let me tell you what it does mean on average. It means on average the tariff rate is the Trump 30% plus the 8% he inherited from history, so 38%. And all of those are extra costs being charged to Americans and will either go through to higher price tags in the store or lower profit margins for the store that's selling it to you. But from past experience, most of it's going to be higher price tags for Americans.
Here is this new Supreme Court ruling. It deals President Trump another loss. This is a late Friday decision which halts Trump's attempted deportations. The loss cuts to the heart of the deportation agenda we've seen here, stopping Trump from efforts to rush deportations through by claiming these new powers and requiring the due process that his administration has been trying to crush. That's simply what the ruling does, and we're going to break down how. Here, though, first is the broad coalition that ruled against Trump late today, Friday. On the result, it's 7-2, including all Trump appointees joining the decision that deals him this new loss. It's the same coalition the court had in the earlier round in this case, which was an emergency ruling blocking deportations. Today, Justice Kavanaugh again ruled against Trump. He also concurred to add a process point that he would have the court take the rest of the case sooner, basically. All of this is bad news for Trump, who's acted like the court would maybe back him on everything that he wants because, in his mind, he won that big immunity case last year. He seemed to reference it at times dealing with Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice. Meanwhile, Trump's lawyers have been deliberately testing and sometimes breaking rules to try to see if they can get things fast-tracked to the Supreme Court so they might get granted new powers. Today's written ruling against Trump comes just after oral arguments where justices were very skeptical of Trump's other power claims. That was yesterday. And this also suggests an unusually fast and strong pushback to a president this early in his term. Legal experts say that is probably needed precisely as the proportionate response to given how radical President Trump has been acting, at least in these first 100 days of the term. Now, here are the details. We'll do it in plain English. First, the court majority found Trump's deportation plans break due process. That's the essential rules that protect you and any other resident in the U.S. against federal agents or police abusing your rights or mistakenly imprisoning or deporting you when they could have the wrong person. The court finding the Trump administration was crushing people's ability to exercise due process rights, which surely does not pass muster. Now, second, the Supreme Court rejected Trump's request to basically try to reboot and restart those particular type of deportations. We're not talking about all deportations, which continue in this country, like many countries that have immigration enforcement, but we're talking about these particularly controversial ones where he wanted to use war powers. And so the court in this new ruling found that President Trump is enjoined from removing any of these people suing and other basically similar people. The court uses other language, but they're referring to folks who might be removed under the Alien Enemies Act pending order. So that means this effort is now blocked. Federal agents cannot deport those particular people. And agents know they'd be risking their own careers and punishment if they break what is now, tonight, a clear Supreme Court order. Third, This ruling rebukes Trump's bid to try to rush and game the system. His agents were basically testing judges by seeing if they could just rush people out of the country without the due process and then tell judges, well, they're gone, so you don't have any jurisdiction over them anymore. If you've been following the news, you've seen that trick or ploy play out in some cases, but the court is saying that stops. It was most dramatically and kind of immaturely demonstrated, that approach, when Trump's top diplomat, Marco Rubio, posted an oopsie message online dealing with the very serious allegation that they had intentionally deported people, ducking judicial oversight because they allegedly did it after the judge had ordered, in that case, planes to turn back around. Now, today's order puts a stop to that type of lawless gamesmanship, but it also still leaves the final decision on these attempted powers for another day. And I can tell you tonight, that's how it's supposed to be. Cases go up the courts over time. And in the modern era, that happens without an administration in bad faith trying to cut the courts out of that process with these sort of ploys. In fact, it's interesting, I'm going to point out here that Trump appointee Kavanaugh refers to that today. I told you he wrote separately while joining with the big 7-2 majority against Trump, but he wrote separately noting that this ruling blocks Trump deportations by ensuring judges, quote, can decide whether these Venezuelan detainees may be lawfully removed before they are in fact removed. That is a reference to things working as they should rather than being gamed by Trump. And the point is, of course, an implicit criticism of that kind of Trump plot, where they were trying allegedly to remove and deport people before judges could rule on whether those moves, some of them, maybe none or maybe some, were in fact illegal. And if you think about that, of course, that's a blueprint for trying to get away with any illegal things. All of these are setbacks for Trump, suggests this case faces an uphill battle. But as Kavanaugh did note, the ruling blocks Trump's policy for further review in the courts. The Supreme Court has not made any of those final rulings, which take more time. Nicole Wallace and I were discussing that process, and sometimes you get these decisions later on in the process. Well, they haven't made a final merits ruling on the larger power grab that's attempted by Trump here. Will this court grant Trump those new wartime powers that he clearly says he wants to wield against migrants from countries that we're not at war with? We don't know yet. But this is a new ruling and it has some clues that the 7-2 coalition is skeptical of some of these kind of power grabs. And that's striking because, remember, these past cases in general in American history, they do grant presidents, any president, a lot of power, a lot of broad kind of authority over immigration and national security. Immigration, for example, is something where there are laws set, but then the president enforces them. There's not a lot of back and forth with Congress on day-to-day activities. Ties, jump balls, they go to the president. But that's also bad news for Trump because, in other words, presidents get room for bold strokes and even some reasonable, honest errors. So it takes a lot for the court to block a president's entire use of a lane of immigration powers in real time, which is what's happening to Trump. And that relates to a fourth point in the ruling today. This court notes how Trump has not facilitated the return of the mistakenly deported man to El Salvador, Alberto Garcia, an individual who's now been caught up in all of this international gamesmanship. Trump basically confessed he could follow that court order, could get him back, but he's not gonna, at least for now. It's something the president actually admitted in one interview, and other officials have implied as much. And so now we're learning for the first time the court referring to that today, noting the Trump administration asserts it is unable to provide for the return of an individual it deported in error to a prison in El Salvador. And then it has the citation, that's lawyer speak, but the court is clearly referencing in the case there, Abrego Garcia versus Noem versus Trump Homeland Security. Now, the ruling previews the fact that Garcia has a strong case. Doesn't mean he'll win, but he has a strong case. The court saying today, for the first time, in Garcia versus the Trump administration, Mr. Garcia's interests are, quote, particularly weighty. Again, that doesn't resolve it, but it tells you this isn't a jump ball. He has weighty or strong interests, which is what you'd expect for someone stuck in a foreign prison when the people who sent them there admit it was a mistake and he shouldn't even be there. And they could bring him back, but they won't. Now, the skepticism from this court was also clear in a related issue about citizenship and immigration, but not this case, the wider question of whether executive orders can rewrite the Constitution. Legal spoiler alert, that's never been the case. But we heard skepticism from multiple justices in Thursday's oral arguments.
Why would you ever take this case to us?
Well, Justice Kagan asked my questions better than I could have.
Did I understand you correctly to tell Justice Kagan that the government wanted to reserve its right to maybe not follow a Second Circuit precedent?
Your argument seems to turn our justice system, in my view at least, into a catch-me-if-you-can kind of regime.
They're finding these actions illegal because they're exceeding existing authority.
I don't understand how that is remotely consistent with the rule of law.
That's the skepticism. Meanwhile, there's new criticism of Trump leaning into parts of the trappings of autocratic government. We saw the foreign trip, cozying up to people that he once called terror funders, seeking a huge gift from their king, prepping his own military parade. Now his administration erecting a controversial banner of his face that adorns a federal building. This is not typically what you see in America. It doesn't break any particular law, but it's a vibe. Trump also has pushed talk of breaking constitutional limits, like ruling past 2029. Then he walked back that claim under fire, while also pushing other anti-democratic moves. He's pushed out several FBI directors, undercutting the traditional 10-year term that tries to fight partisanship. He's raged against the very first one he memorably fired, James Comey. Of course, all Comey did to upset Trump was testify under oath. Investigations found it to be truthful, but that got him not only Trump's ire or anger, which is perfectly fine, you can have that feeling, but rather alleged abuse of government powers. Trump openly advocated investigating or jailing him as an opponent, attacked him in the first term. There was an unusual tax audit, remember that, which raised questions about whether that was intrusive retribution. And now this week, Trump seizing on Comey's Instagram post, which would be laughable if this was not a pretext for serious government abuse. You are looking at a very simple thing that Comey says he observed walking on the beach, seashells spelled out referencing 86ing 47, a kind of reference to opposing the 47th president, which of course is the current president, Donald Trump. 86 refers to something being sold out. It actually dates all the way back to 1930s soda counter slang. Webster's Dictionary's website explained, and this was written up long before this week, it means to throw out, to get rid of, refuse service to. Others, though, have at times also tried that slang out to reference taking someone out or something sinister. It's just not the original definition. Now, some people alleged Comey's post was some kind of, quote, call to violence. He denied that, and out of caution, even removed the post. So keep all of that seashell history in mind, because now Trump and his aides are using the seashells to fan an allegation that this was a real serious threat.
As I mentioned at the top of the show today, Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill, as he calls it, faced a big, brutal setback in the House today. The Republican-led Budget Committee failed to pass the package when 5 of their own members voted against it. I mentioned how it was really 4, 1 for a procedural reason. But that aside, the committee is now scheduled to meet again on Sunday to try to figure out what the heck to do next. Now, it's welcome news that Trump's resolution hit a snag. After all, this is a bill that extends tax cuts for rich people and pays for them by cutting critical programs like Medicaid and SNAP. But that's not what concerned these Republicans who voted against it. Their concern was that they aren't cutting enough. And considering the damage this bill could already do, it could actually get worse if these hardliners get their way. I mean, in just the cuts to Medicaid in the current version, millions of Americans will lose coverage. And entire hospitals, particularly in rural areas, could be forced to shut down, which basically means that entire communities, whether they use Medicaid or not, could lose access to health care. And during that hearing in the Budget Committee today, the ranking Democrat on the committee, Congressman Brendan Boyle, put things very plainly.
This is the overarching truth. It is the biggest tax cuts for billionaires in American history, paid for by throwing 13.7 million Americans off their health care coverage. Now, those aren't my claims. That is not subjective. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office just this week confirmed that at least 13,700,000 Americans will lose their health care if the GOP bill for billionaires becomes law.
And joining me now is the ranking Democrat who just saw there on the House Budget Committee, Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania. Congressman, I know you've had a long day. Thank you for staying up and coming on with me. Nobody knows more than you do about the status of this bill. So let me start by asking you, I mean, there seem to be basically three negotiating parties: hardline Republicans, Democrats, and other Republicans. Democrats are pretty united here. The Republicans, I started the show talking about this, but you know this way better than I do. There's those who think there should be more cuts. There are those who are concerned by the cuts. What are they trying to decide among themselves right now?
Yeah, great to be with you, Jen. And I actually opened my remarks this morning at 9 a.m. by saying that today in the Budget Committee, we would hear a vigorous debate between Republicans and some other Republicans. That vigorous debate combined with a completely unified Democratic opposition, which I don't think we can overlook, the fact that we Democrats were 100% unified meant that Republicans needed almost a totally unanimous front themselves. They didn't have it, and therefore we were able to block the big Republican bill for billionaires. Now, the next step on this is that Speaker Johnson has ordered the Budget Committee to come back and work at this again Sunday at 10 p.m., just in time for primetime viewing on MSNBC. The Budget Committee will be back. And so Speaker Johnson is hoping that in these 48 hours or so, they're able to finally come up with a way to assuage their most hardline Freedom Caucus members who want to see even more than 13.7 million Americans lose their health care. But as you pointed out, and my final point on this, every further thing that Mike Johnson gives to the Freedom Caucus means their problem actually gets more difficult with their so-called moderate Republican members. By the way, both groups, both the Freedom Caucus member Republicans and the so-called moderate Republicans, both are large enough to actually sink this bill on the House floor.
It's a seesaw of sorts. I wanted to take the moment, since you are here with me, just to talk about some of the terms here that a lot of people are very familiar with, but we're going to hear more of them, and you can explain them very well. So Republicans have said that their plan to install work requirements for Medicaid recipients would make sure that, quote, this is the term they use, able-bodied people would not be draining funds. Yeah. And if you just hear that term, it sounds not bad. I mean, what does able-bodied mean? But talk to me about what that talking point is actually really about.
Yeah, Republicans kind of gave the game away today in the Budget Committee because, you know, the statistic that was confirmed this week by Congressional Budget Office that 13.7 million of our fellow Americans would lose their health care is truly shocking. To put this in perspective, there is no previous law or event in American history, not even the Great Depression, forced more than 13 million Americans to lose their health care. So that is the scale of this. So the way the Republicans rhetorically are getting around that is say, oh, no real Americans, no able-bodied Americans who are working would lose their Medicaid or their health care. It's just two groups, illegal immigrants and those who are defrauding the system. That is the sort of BS that they are with a straight face attempting to peddle. In terms of able-bodied, what they mean essentially are work requirements. Well, let me say, I'm a Democrat who is proudly for work. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Philadelphia in a very working-class household where I had two parents who both worked a lot of hours. My dad more than 60 hours a week most times just to be able to provide for us. So, of course, we Democrats stand for working people. What they really want to do, what the Republicans are attempting to do, is what the state of Arkansas did a few years ago and put in such onerous requirements of paperwork that they actually prevent those people who legitimately and lawfully qualify for Medicaid, who most of the time are working full time, but prevent them from actually getting the benefits that they qualify for. That is what Republicans are doing in this bill.
Thank you for that explanation. I think it's very helpful. Let me ask you about, one of the things that was striking today, or you heard this criticism from some Republicans, that Trump wasn't super engaged, or he could have used more of his leverage, I guess, to move this across the finish line. Do you think that's, he didn't do a lot, it seems, publicly, but do you think that's true? Would that have changed the outcome on the Budget Committee vote today?
Well, to be fair, Donald Trump was very busy collecting bribes, essentially, in the Middle East. So he had his own agenda at the moment. And, frankly, I think it's safe to say Donald Trump is not exactly a policy guy or an in-the-weeds sort of guy. But the reality is Mike Johnson's whole speakership rests on the support of Donald Trump. I've had House Republicans flat out tell me that one tweet from Donald Trump pulling his support for Mike Johnson would be the end of Mike Johnson's speakership. So we all know here that even if we Democrats were to do on any issue some sort of agreement with Mike Johnson, he can't actually make it happen. He can't actually deliver the Republican votes on the other side. It is their dear leader, which is Donald Trump. So I think for Republicans to ultimately be able to get this passed, I do believe it'll actually take Donald Trump doing what he has done in the past on a few different bills, which is, and I'm not exaggerating, literally calling the cell phone numbers of individual House Republicans while they're on the House floor, pulling them into the Republican members' cloakroom and screaming at them and cursing at them so loud that other members nearby can hear his end of the conversation.
We may see that happen. It may be required. Congressman Brendan Boyle, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Okay, did you think that Donald Trump's attempt to get a $400 million airplane from Qatar couldn't get worse? Spoiler alert, here's Trump tonight telling the origin story of the $400 million plane on Fox.
When we landed, we parked right next to the 747 of Qatar. And we parked next, there was another 747, 2 or 3 of them, which the Arab world has. And when you look at a new 747 and you look at a plane that's 42 years old, not even the same plane, the other ones are bigger and sleeker and sharper, and it doesn't look right. And he said, great gentleman, Tamim, he said, I would like to help if you want. I said, how can you help? Well, we happen to have a plane. And I said, well, what do you want to do? He said, you have been, and he doesn't mean me, although I have been good. He means our country. And he said, your country has been very good to us. I would love to do something to help with this situation you have with Air Force One. I said, that's nice. What do you suggest? And he suggested this. And I said, you know what? That's very nice. That's very nice. I appreciate it. What would be the price? He said, there is no price. I said, that's nice. I made a good deal. We need a plane for a couple of years before we get the other ones because Boeing is very late.
So if you're actually the president of the United States and somebody gives you a free thing like that, it's not indicative of the fact that you made a good deal. It's actually just indicative of the fact that you're the president of the United States and you have a lot of power and people know how you work. The president of the United States is not actually going to be allowed to ride around in an interim Qatari hand-me-down jet while a new Air Force One is being built. For a lot of very specific military and security reasons, the Air Force Ones take a long time to build because of the extensive security required to carry a president. I mean, they've got evasive maneuvers and they can refuel in the air. This is just, it's not just a normal fancy plane. Outfitting that Qatari jet to be an Air Force One could reportedly cost up to $1 billion. I've seen a lot of estimates, but they're in the several hundred million to $1 billion. Donald Trump said no price, because there's no price for Trump if he can get the American taxpayer to pay for it. There's so much more to unpack in that scene that Trump described, which we'll discuss in a moment. Trump's explanation comes after spending days being dazzled by dictator palaces in the repressive Middle Eastern countries en route back to the United States and all the pesky frustrations of the fact that back home he's got this liberal democracy. Sputtering though it may be, it's still a liberal democracy. He doesn't seem too happy about it. Maybe that's why he spent today on Truth Social lashing out at his Republican allies in Congress and on the Supreme Court who defied him today. And also, by the way, at Bruce Springsteen and Taylor Swift. Trump raged at Springsteen for speaking out against him on Wednesday night in England.
A majority of our elected representatives have failed to protect the American people from the abuses of an unfit president and a rogue government. They have no concern or idea of what it means to be deeply American.
Now, in fairness, Trump and Springsteen are both, Springsteen and Taylor Swift are both billionaires. Unlike Trump, however, or the petrostate royals, these two earned their fortunes. Springsteen and Swift became rich through their talent and their hard work, not through crypto schemes and influence scams and fraudulent universities and steak. Trump also went after the Republican-led Supreme Court, which ruled against him again today. Quote, the Supreme Court is being played by the radical left losers who have no support, and the public hates them, and their only hope is the intimidation of the court itself. We can't let that happen to our country, end quote. 7-2 ruling on the Supreme Court, by the way. Majority of people on that court support Donald Trump. All of this comes after wrapping up a foreign trip where the President of the United States, the leader of the free world, ostensibly, Donald Trump, appeared much, much more comfortable in the company of unelected strongmen than with America's Democratic allies. In the United Arab Emirates, Trump gushed about how beautiful everything was, oblivious or indifferent to that country's record of repression and censorship. Trump praised the dictator of Qatar and fawned over ceremonial camels. Carried on a lot about these camels, by the way. In Saudi Arabia, Trump was mesmerized by the pageantry, blinded by the gold, the guards. Said nothing about the mass executions or people jailed in Saudi Arabia for dissent. As the New York Times writes in its piece about the local reaction to Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia, quote, it's impossible to accurately determine what proportion of Saudis have positive views of Mr. Trump. Cultural norms favor public conformity. And Prince Mohammed has intensified political repression while expanding social freedoms. As a result, many Saudis are reluctant to share their true views in public. The son of a prominent cleric imprisoned in Saudi Arabia castigated Mr. Trump for what he described as whitewashing the reputation of Prince Mohammed, who he said was an authoritarian leader who has brutally silenced all dissent, end quote. Listen for yourself as Donald Trump played lackey to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who, according to U.S. intelligence, ordered the dismemberment and murder of the Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi during Trump's first term.
We have great partners in the world, but we have none stronger and nobody like the gentleman that's right before me. He's your greatest representative. Greatest representative. And if I didn't like him, I'd get out of here so fast.
He says, I like him. He actually said, I think I like him too much. And for anyone suggesting this was strictly business, because it was a business trip, remember that most of the quote unquote deals that Trump touted were finalized under the Biden administration. The Washington Post reports as Air Force One touched down in the Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and United Arab Emirates, the White House released daily lists of the dozens of deals that it said Trump had secured during his visits. But at least half of the dozen of the contracts were announced before Trump even took office in January. Here's one example the Post gave. Quote, the administration announced $8.5 billion in projects involving the Texas energy company McDermott. Except the company previously announced contracts for that initiative during Joe Biden's presidency in 2023 and 2024, end quote. This fawning praise wasn't some strategic negotiating tactic. It was a fraudulent attempt to take credit for Biden's record and much more importantly, a way to cozy up to corrupt leaders and perhaps pick a new plane or a golf course or a crypto deal, maybe even a Trump Tower in Damascus in return.
Just after President Trump's sweeping tariff announcement last month, you might remember Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut warned that anyone who had advanced knowledge of Trump's plan to upend the global economic order could stand to benefit financially.
The bottom line is that the chaotic nature of this tariff policy, with Trump's position changing every single hour, gives ample opportunity for any individual who has early access to information about the White House's change in position to make boatloads of money, either by investing at the right time or pulling their money out of the market at the right time.
Those comments come as new mandated government financial disclosure forms show Attorney General Pam Bondi sold between $1 and $5 million worth of Trump media shares on April 2nd, the very same day President Trump announced those tariffs. NBC News reached out to the Justice Department with questions on Bondi's stock trades. They declined to comment. Let's bring in one of the writers who broke this story on Bondi's sales, money and politics reporter for ProPublica, Robert Federecci. Robert, we should know Bondi said she'd sell this stock within 90 days of becoming AG, so her deadline would have been May 4th. So this sale falls within that window, but it's the timing on this exact day that's raising questions. Could it just be coincidental that this sale came just before President Trump's tariff announcement that tanked the markets?
It definitely could be. A lot of insider trading investigations start exactly that way. You see a trade that is perfectly timed, and you dig in deeper, and you find out that for whatever reason, it was just a coincidence, right? So one question we had was, did she have control over the timing? Did she have advanced knowledge of how severe the tariffs that were announced on Liberation Day were going to be? It's been now, something like 36 hours since we reached out to the Justice Department and to the Attorney General, and we've gotten none of those explanations. We have not heard back.
Walk us through what you do know and what you don't know.
So what we know is that on April 2nd, she sold between $1 and $5 million in shares of Trump Media, which is the president's social media company. Also, that's exact same day after the stock market closed, the president from the White House had a press conference where he announced his Liberation Day tariffs. The market was reeling afterwards. Trump Media fell 13% in the days that followed. And by selling on April 2nd, the Attorney General avoided those losses on what was a massive stock sale.
So do we know what kind of losses she might have avoided?
Up to 13% of that $1 to $5 million. So we're not talking about a small amount of money here.
You report it's unclear whether the Attorney General had any knowledge of this tariff announcement coming, but would an AG typically be involved in tariff discussions?
So oftentimes when one part of the executive branch is rolling out a policy, other parts of the executive branch, other agencies will be consulted. There's an interagency process. And also, just like any other workplace, there's all sorts of informal conversations. So that is one of the questions we posed to the Attorney General. Did she have any advanced knowledge of how severe these tariffs were going to be? Obviously, everyone knew the president was going to announce these tariffs on April 2nd, but the market up until that point had assumed that the tariffs were not going to be as severe as they ultimately were, which is why the market plummeted.
And so the question is, what did she know? When did she know it? What were the details that she had, if she had any additional details before this announcement?
Exactly.
Our understanding is that this trade that she made was signed off by two people from the Office of Government Ethics. What does that office do? Are the people working there career public servants or political appointees?
They're career public servants, is my understanding. You know, we have seen government officials make trades in the past, right? So the most notable example being Richard Burr, right? The senator from North Carolina who is chairman of the Intelligence Committee. He dumped massive amounts of stock a week before the coronavirus stock market crash. And of course, as a senator on the Health Committee, you know, he had been receiving briefings about the coming coronavirus crisis. And so what happens under normal circumstances when there is a suspiciously timed trade like this is there will oftentimes be an investigation by the SEC or the DOJ afterwards to figure out exactly what the person knew when they made that trade. I don't know if we're going to see that here.
All right, we'll stay tuned. Robert Federighi, thank you for joining us.